we're starting, I'm texting my mom. She didn't buy me the right Crocs for prom, okay? Just give me like a minute here. Black will just look stupid with my dress. God. You know what? Let's start. Just cut that. Just cut that. Oh, we've been looking at the moon our whole lives. Sometimes it looks like a little toenail in the sky. Sometimes it's a huge bowl of milk. But ultimately, it's always the same moon. So where did it come from? Like, it's just there. Where did it come from, you know? Let's dive into this.
We get it on every night, and that moon gets big and bright. Super
Oh my gosh. You're still here? Alright, I might as well tell you about some things. Let's get some science done up in this, you know? There have been several different theories about the moon's origins in the past. But before I talk to you about those, or even the current theories, I have to explain our guidelines to what makes a theory valid and logical in the world of science. Alright? Scientists have agreed upon 3 different things that makes a theory logical. Let's get into them.
Fly me to the moon, let me play among the stars, and let me see what spring is like.
Number 1, a theory would need to explain why the moon has a smaller and less dense iron core than the Earth. Number 2, it would also need to explain the moon and Earth having similar compositions. Scientists found, after analyzing moon rocks, that there are a lot of the same oxygen isotopes between the moon and the Earth. However, there are also several differences between the two. So, a theory would need to explain why the moon and Earth are similar but not identical, and for what reasons do these discrepancies exist. Number 3. The near and far side of the moon differ in structure. The near side of the moon contains a lot of craters and has a thinner crust than the far side. The near side also has less volatile surfaces, which basically means that the moon is completely dry on this side surface, with no traces that water had ever existed there, meaning that this side would have had to be heated for a longer period of time. So, now that we know the guidelines that a theory needs to address, let's get into the past theories. There was one theory called fission theory. Fun fact, this one was backed up by the son of Charles Darwin. Fission theory basically stated that the moon was once a part of the Earth, but eventually grew apart from it and separated, much like fission in terms of cells in biology. So if this theory was right, then the Earth and moon would have identical compositions, which I've already stated is not the case. So this theory was inaccurate. Another theory that was suggested was called the capture theory. This theory literally just suggests that the moon and the Earth formed in different places of the solar system, with the moon as a small wandering planet. But then the moon was suddenly captured into Earth's orbit through gravitational forces. However, scientists proved this theory improbable because the likelihood that a massive, speeding planet would gracefully and delicately ease into the Earth's orbit instead of slamming into the planet, leaving nothing but death and despair. Really, the likelihood on the planet not slamming into the Earth or just missing it altogether and drifting into space was so slim that scientists didn't even want to consider it anymore because it's basically impossible. Also, it doesn't explain the extra heating of one side of the moon, making that side less volatile. And another past theory was called condensation theory, which came from an American astronomer named Thomas Jefferson Jackson C. Wow, say that 5 times fast. Basically, this one suggested that the moon and Earth formed at the same time, with the moon already in orbit around Earth. However, if this was true, then the Earth and moon should really have identical compositions, and the moon should really be a mini version of Earth, which we know it's not. The current theory is called the Great Impact Theory. Imagine a young Earth, just a baby, only half formed and so oblivious to what's coming. Now, here we have a Mars-sized projectile. Its name is Thea. Oh my gosh, oh no! It's headed for poor baby Earth. Ah! Oh no! It's gonna hit Earth! Ah! Boom! The projectile grazes the side of Earth at an oblique angle, making the Earth spin faster, and debris from both the Earth and Theia come off from the impact of the collision. These pieces of debris are ejected into Earth's orbit and eventually accumulate into what we now know as the Moon. Ta-da! And this theory checks off all the boxes too. The Moon is much lighter and less dense than the Earth because the debris that formed it was from the mantles of both Earth and Theia. That's why it doesn't have a large iron core. Number 2, by the time the debris finally came together after being in orbit, volatile compounds like water had been evaporated. That's why the surface of the Moon has less volatile substances. And lastly, the Earth and Moon would have a similar composition because, well, this theory stated that the Moon is literally pieces of Earth mixed with debris from another projectile. So it makes sense that they would have similar compositions because one literally contributed to making the other, but not totally identical because there is mixtures of Theia in that Earth mantle debris that ultimately formed the Moon.
If you're anything like me, you might be thinking, what? Yeah, okay, yeah, sorry. If you're anything like me, you might be thinking, where did scientists even come up with this theory? Like, did it just come out of thin air? No! These scientists started out with the question, where did the Moon come from, and moved from there.
It all kind of started with Galileo's use of the telescope, which allowed us to view the Moon close up and to visually explore its surface. Before him, no one had thought to use a telescope to look at the sky or space. People used to kind of just think that the Moon was this pristine, perfect sphere that was sort of a heavenly body or something in the sky. The telescope allowed us to see the craters and indents and further bruises on the Moon's surface that showed it was not as perfect as we thought. This prompted further questions about the Moon and pushed scientists to question its origins and purpose further. Hundreds of years later is when we really got our breakthrough discovery. The Apollo missions in the 1970s and space travel in general really brought us to a closer understanding of the Moon. Stepping on the Moon was a huge deal in itself, but what the astronomers brought back from its surface is where the discoveries really began. These rock samples that they brought back from the Moon were super similar to the ones on Earth. They found that the Moon rock shared a bunch of oxygen isotopes found on Earth. Along with this, they found the Moon rocks to be super dry and lacking any source of water. With this new information, they were able to question the past theories on the Moon's creation and start to hypothesize new ones.
But it wasn't until these two guys named William Hartman and Donald Davis that the theory really started to get on a roll.
Davis was a scientist that had helped in bringing the Apollo 13 mission back from the Moon, and Hartman had done work in the past that dealt with interpreting a planet's age based on the numbers of craters it had on its surface. William and Davis stemmed the idea of the giant impact theory off of the work done by a Russian scientist named V.S. Savronov in the 1960s from the Soviet Union. Savronov's basic ideas involved cosmic grains and dust colliding and sticking together to form larger and larger bodies that he had called planetesimals. Sound familiar? Maybe a little bit. Yeah. So Hartman and Davis were familiar with Savronov's work and had a hypothesis that it could connect to the origin of the Moon. So they ran calculations on the rate of growth of the second largest, third largest, fourth largest, fifth largest, sixth largest, seventh largest, eighth largest, ninth largest. Oh, okay, you get it. You get the point now. So yeah, the second, third, fourth, etc. largest bodies in the vicinity of Earth, and use these calculations to estimate the largest impact that could have been made by that body. They determined that Moon to Mars-sized bodies were all around Earth when it had approached its current size, and could have very easily hit the baby Earth. They determined that if a body was large enough, it could have been able to blow mantle material out of Earth, creating the debris that formed the Moon later on. This would explain why the Moon doesn't have a big iron core, because it's made of mantle material from the two planets. And it would also explain why the Moon has very few volatiles. Hartman and Davis presented their findings for the first time at a 1974 conference on satellites. After they presented their idea at this conference, another scientist named A.G.W. Cameron told the two that he and his partner, Bill Ward, were kind of working on something similar, but they were approaching it from a different angle. No, actually, they were literally studying angles. Angular momentum constraints in the solar system, that is. Anyways, their findings showed that the body would have had to roughly be Mars-sized, while Hartman and Davis only had a spectrum of sizes of the possible planet. So, now that we knew the size of the projectile, the theory was off and running, and so many other scientists wanted to contribute and study it even further. 10 years later, in 1984, there was another conference held in Hawaii that was specifically dedicated to the origin of the moon. It was at this conference that the giant impact theory was agreed upon to be the most plausible theory, and at the end of that meeting it emerged as the top hypothesis and has remained on top ever since.
However, even though this theory is the leading theory, we still can't 100% prove that it's accurate. So, who knows? Maybe another theory will come along one day and take the place of the giant impact theory. But for now, this theory has held up for 25 years with the questioning and scrutiny under some of the greatest minds in science, and it is one of the closest things we have to knowing the origins of the moon today.